Lady Beatrix Pomeroy stood beside the lemonade table at Almack's under chandeliers that forgave nothing. Scarlet silk clung to her frame, too bold for a wallflower, too defiant for a girl they had called Duckling since she was 8. The black velvet ribbon beneath her bust might as well have been a battle standard. Her long kid gloves reached above her elbows, the leather cool against skin that felt colder still, the particular cold that comes when one knows a room is waiting to laugh. A ripple of whispers slid through the crowd, like wind through dry reeds, carrying the familiar weight of mockery she had borne since childhood. Fans halted mid-flick, freezing in elegant hands. Matrons' mouths tightened into thin lines of disapproval. Young gentlemen glanced at her, then away, as if the sight of her boldness might somehow be contagious, might infect them with the same reckless defiance. Marquess Sebastian Delaney held court near a pillar crowned with flowers, his voice pitched to carry across the polished floor. He did not bother to lower it. He preferred his cruelty to have witnesses to be savored by as many ears as possible. "The Duckling has dressed herself as flame," he said, smile lazy as a cat's eyes bright with the pleasure of a pin finding flesh. "How?" "Ambitious." The word landed with precision. A lady's brows rose in practiced arch. A gentleman's lips curved with amusement. Somewhere, a nervous titter escaped before being quickly stifled. Beatrix kept her chin lifted, though her gloved fingers curled against her palm until the leather creased at the wrist. She did not look to her mother for rescue. Lady Pomeroy's rescue was always a leash, always came with conditions that tightened around the throat. 15 years. 15 years of curtsies that earned nothing but more mockery, more whispers, more quiet cuts. Then the air changed. His Grace Hadrian Blackmere, Duke of Blackmere, crossed the floor with the inevitability of a storm front, moving across open water. He wore midnight blue tailored to perfection, his white cravat knotted with surgical precision, each fold a small monument to control. On his right hand, a heavy signet ring caught lamplight like a weapon waiting to be drawn. Men parted without conscious thought. Their bodies understood threat before their minds could name it. He stopped before her, extended his hand palm, angled just so proper and public and utterly deliberate. "Lady Beatrix." Her name in his mouth sounded clean, certain, as if it belonged to someone who mattered, someone whose existence was not merely tolerated, but acknowledged. She placed her gloved hand in his. The contact jolted up her arm like a struck tuning fork, vibrating through bone and blood. And then, slowly, so slowly, the room could not pretend it was accidental. She began to peel her glove down. Kid leather clung to her skin, then yielded inch by pale inch. Bare flesh emerged under the chandelier's unforgiving glare, exposed in a way that made breath catch in a dozen throats. A small indecency. A controlled rebellion. A declaration written in skin. Hadrian's gaze dropped to her exposed wrist. His jaw set, once muscle jumping hard as iron. He lifted her bare hand, bowed over it with the grace of a man who knew every rule of society and had chosen in this moment to weaponize them. Then he pressed his mouth to her knuckles and held it there long enough for the orchestra to falter in its playing, long enough for the room to inhale sharply and forget to exhale long enough for the kiss to stop being courtesy and become statement. When he straightened his thumb, remained against the side of her hand, a heartbeat too long, a pressure that sent heat crawling up her arm, despite every lesson in propriety she had ever been taught. Silence fell like a curtain dropping. Then whispers erupted, spreading through the assembly like wine spilled across white linen, fast staining impossible to contain. Beatrix did not pull away. Did not cling either. She stood as if the scandal settling over her shoulders were a cloak she had chosen herself had tailored to fit. Delaney's voice sliced through the hush silk wrapped around a blade. "One would think your grace meant to marry her." Hadrian's glance was brief, cold as January rain on stone. One would be wise to think before one speaks. A program slipped from someone's nerveless fingers, fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird. A woman behind her fan gave a small, shocked sound that might have been scandal or delight, or both at once. Beatrix's mother materialized at her elbow, like an anxious ghost, fingers digging into silk, hard enough to leave marks. "You will leave," Lady Pomeroy hissed, voice shaking with barely controlled panic. This instant, Beatrix met her mother's fear with stone. She had learned over 15 years to build walls inside herself where panic could not reach. "I have been quiet long enough," she said, not shouting, not pleading, simply stating a fact as immovable as bedrock. She turned once more to face the room, to the faces that had fed on her humiliation since she was 8 years old, that had sharpened their wit on her plainness and called it harmless fun, and lifted her chin higher. She was no longer prey. She was marked, and in being marked by the most feared Duke in England, she had become something far more dangerous than a wallflower. She had become visible. Rain drummed against the townhouse windows 2 nights later, turning Mayfair's gaslit streets into rivers of reflected light. Hadrian shut the door on the noise with a controlled click, his boot heels leaving dark prints on marble that a footman would erase by dawn. He did not remove his gloves. He stood in the entrance hall as if the walls themselves might gossip if he showed too much ease. Lady Winifred Blackmere sat in the drawing room by a fire that had been laid but barely touched, as if even warmth were something to be rationed in this house of careful strategy. She wore mourning black that did not dull her, a widow's weeds transformed into armor by sheer force of will. Her fan lay on her lap like a blade, at rest, waiting to be drawn. "You have made a spectacle," she said without preamble, without rising, without any pretense that this was a social call between aunt and nephew. Hadrian crossed to the sideboard and poured brandy with hands that did not shake. He did not drink. His knuckles whitened around the glass as if he were strangling something invisible. "The ton will demand payment?" Winifred continued, her voice smooth as polished wood, hard as the same. "They cannot afford to cut you. You sit in the Lords, you own half a county, and you frighten men who pretend that they do not frighten. But they will cut her. They will bleed her until there is nothing left but scandal and ruin." Hadrian set the untouched glass down with the precision that betrayed fury held on a very short leash. His fist clenched at his side, leather glove creaking softly in the silence. "Then they will find she is not alone." Winifred's eyes narrowed sharp as a hawk's spotting movement in tall grass. "Strategy, nephew, not chivalry. Chivalry is what killed your father. What are you doing?" Hadrian's jaw worked once. The fire crackled spitting sparks against the grate. Outside rain lashed the windows with renewed violence. "Keeping a knife from her throat. And if they take payment from you instead, allies withdrawn, votes withheld, influence bled away by inches." Winifred's fan snapped open with a sound like a door slamming shut. "They will make you pay for defending her. They will strip you of every advantage to punish her through you." Hadrian's voice came flat, final as a sealed tomb. "Let them try." The words hung in the warm room. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of embers that died before reaching the chimney. Winifred leaned forward slightly, and for a moment, something almost like approval flickered across her face. "Your father once made a public gesture for a woman." She said each word, carefully placed. He thought tenderness would be admired, that society would respect his heart. Instead, they used it as a rope to hang him with. You remember what came after. Hadrian's fist tightened until his signet ring bit into his palm through the glove. "I am not my father." "No." Winifred agreed, voice softening only a fraction. "You are colder?" more dangerous. Which is why you must not make his mistakes. She paused, studying him with eyes that had watched 3 generations navigate society's treacherous waters. But if you are committed to this course, if you have already decided, then do it properly. Send for Radley at first light, and review every servant in this household. If Ashfield is half as clever as his reputation suggests, he will already be inside your walls. Hadrian's gaze met hers across the firelit space, and understanding passed between them without words. I want a full accounting, he said. Every key, every entrance, every person who has access to my papers. Winifred's fan snapped shut with quiet satisfaction. I will begin tonight. The scandal sheet arrived at the Pomeroy's breakfast table like a smear of soot carried in by an apologetic footman who could not quite meet anyone's eyes. Cheap paper, cheaper ink, the most feared Duke. And his new Duckling printed in letters large enough to be read across a room. It smelled of oil and malice of presses run in back alleys where reputation was currency and truth an afterthought. Lady Pomeroy seized the paper with shaking hands, then seized Beatrix's bodice with the other, as if she could tear both headline and daughter's defiance away by sheer force. You will apologize, she hissed, voice raw with fear that had been building for 2 days. You will curtsy to Lady Jersey, to Mrs. Drummond Burrell, to every patroness of Almack's, until your knees bleed, if that is what it takes. You will beg their forgiveness. Beatrix sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, and smoothed the black velvet ribbon beneath her bust with the calm precision of someone tying a tourniquet over a wound. I have curtsied for 15 years, Mamma. It has not improved their manners. It has not earned their respect. It has only taught them that I will bend. You are not pretty enough to be bold. The words came out raw, sharpened by terror that her daughter's ruin would drag them all down into the dark. Lady Pomeroy's face had gone pale, her eyes bright with tears she would not allow to fall. You are not wealthy enough, not charming enough, not. Then I will be bold enough for both of us. Beatrix interrupted, her voice steady as a judge delivering sentence. Her bare hands, she had not put on gloves this morning, a small rebellion her mother had not yet noticed, pressed flat against the breakfast table. The wood felt cool, solid, real in a way her mother's fear was not. Lady Pomeroy's breath hitched. Her grip on Beatrix's bodice loosened, fingers trembling. You will lose us, she whispered. And the whisper was worse than the hiss had been worse, because it was true. And they both knew it. Your sisters will have no prospects. Your father, his position at court, it hangs by a thread, Beatrix. No one will stand by you if you turn yourself into a public spectacle. Society does not forgive girls who reach above their station. Beatrix rose from her chair skirts, whispering like secrets being told in the next room. Hope appeared at the doorway, as if summoned by instinct, her eyes alert as a hunting dog's already reading the room for danger. Then let it be known, Beatrix said quietly, each word a nail driven into a coffin, that my family chose the Tun's approval over me. Let it be recorded that when I needed you most, you offered me nothing but more curtsies. She walked toward the door. Her father appeared in the hallway, as if he had been standing there for some time, listening, a baronet caught between the command he felt he should give and the cowardice that kept his mouth shut. His face was gray, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. Beatrix passed him without a word, without a glance. If she looked at him, if she let herself feel the weight of his disappointment, she might break. And she had learned over 15 years that breaking was a luxury she could not afford. Outside the breakfast room, she heard her mother's sob, high and sharp and quickly muffled. The clock in the hall ticked steadily, indifferent. A carriage rolled past in the street wheels clattering over cobblestones, carrying other people's lives forward, while hers seemed to contract into this single moment of choosing. Beatrix climbed the stairs to her room alone. Behind her, the house settled into the kind of silence that comes after something irreparable has been said, after a bridge has been burned, and there is no going back across the ash. 1 week passed like a slow fever. Beatrix received no callers. Her mother took meals in her room. Her father left the house early each morning and returned late smelling of port and defeat. The calling cards that had once arrived, few dutiful pitying, stopped coming entirely. On the 8th day, a note arrived from Blackmere townhouse on thick cream paper that smelled faintly of sealing wax and authority. An invitation to call during proper hours. A chaperone would be provided if needed. Lady Pomeroy read it, lips pressed into a bloodless line. "He toys with you," she said. "Dukes do not marry." She stopped, unable to finish the sentence, unable to speak aloud what Beatrix had been called since childhood. Beatrix took the note from her mother's hands. "Then I will discover his intentions myself." She arrived at Blackmere townhouse at 3 o'clock, precisely because calling hours were rules even scandal could not fully break. A chaperone came with her Lady Pomeroy's cousin, a thin, sour woman, who pretended to admire the library's book spines while listening to every word with the intensity of a paid informant. The library smelled of leather and old paper and power at the particular scent of a room where decisions were made that shaped other people's lives. Books rose to the ceiling on all sides, their spines stamped with gold, their pages holding centuries of accumulated knowledge. The desk in the center looked like an altar to order its surface clear, except for 2 items, a scandal sheet and a letter with a black edge. Hadrian stood behind the desk, with his hands flat on the polished wood, his posture straight enough to make lesser men feel crooked by comparison. He wore gray today, the color of smoke or stone, and his eyes held the same quality, something that could obscure or could crush, depending on need. He slid the scandal sheet across the desk without preamble, without apology. His fingers left no print on the ink. He had learned long ago not to touch poison with bare hands, even metaphorical poison. "I will court you," he said, as if announcing the weather or the time. Beatrix picked up the scandal sheet and folded it once neat as a ledger entry, creasing the paper so the headline disappeared into the fold. "To quiet vultures, or to keep me tethered." Hadrian's jaw tightened fractionally. He set down a second letter, the black-edged one, and pushed it toward her. The wax seal was heavy, pressed deep, and smelled faintly of smoke, as if it had been held too close to a dying candle for too long. Beatrix broke it open with her thumbnail. The wax cracked cleanly, falling in dark red shards onto the desk like drops of dried blood. Inside, Baron Frederick Ashfield's handwriting was confident, each letter formed with the care of a man who understood that presentation mattered almost as much as content. But the confidence could not hide the ugliness beneath the casual cruelty of a predator who had found prey and meant to feast slowly. Payment demanded, not requested, not suggested. Demanded. A document exists that calls into question certain aspects of the late Duke of Blackmere's private affairs. Should His Grace wish this document to remain, private arrangements must be made. And then written as if in afterthought, as casually as one might note the whether Lady Eloise Blackmere's recent indiscretion with a certain gentleman of insufficient means has come to my attention. It would be unfortunate if such information became public knowledge during the season. Beatrix's skin went cold beneath her gloves, the particular bone-deep cold of fear that comes not from physical threat, but from the realization that malice has been given power and is preparing to use it. She looked up slowly. "He dares name your sister." Hadrian's jaw worked, once muscle jumping beneath skin like something caged trying to break free. His hands remained flat on the desk, but his knuckles had gone white. "He dares because he believes I will pay to protect her. He believes every man has a price, and that price is usually found in the people he loves. And will you? Beatrix asked, keeping her voice level, though her heart had begun to beat faster. Will you pay? No. The word fell between them like a stone into still water, creating ripples that would spread farther than either of them could yet see. Beatrix set the letter down carefully, as if it might explode. Her gloved fingers rested on the edge of the desk, and she became aware of the silence in the room and the kind of heavy silence that fills spaces where important decisions are being made. Then why do you need me? She asked, and heard the edge in her own voice the challenge. Hadrian leaned forward slightly, and the desk between them suddenly felt too small, the air too close and warm, despite the autumn chill seeping through the windows. Because Ashfield is feeding the Tun lies, and you have survived their lies longer than anyone I know. You have learned to stand upright under the weight of mockery. You do not faint when rooms turn ugly. You do not apologize for existing. He paused, and something shifted in his eyes, something almost like respect. I want your eyes, your patience, your refusal to break. Beatrix felt her throat tighten. No one had ever wanted those things from her. They had wanted her to be quieter, smaller, more invisible. What you mean, she said slowly, is that you want me to help you hunt a man who trades in secrets. Yes. The honesty of it struck her harder than flattery would have. She studied his face, the hard line of his jaw, the gray eyes that gave nothing away, the mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago, and had never bothered to relearn. Terms, she said, as if negotiating a business contract, because perhaps that was exactly what this was. Hadrian's expression did not change, but something in his posture eased fractionally. Name them. Public courtship conducted with proper forms. Chaperones when required, but not used as jailers. No private commands given as if I were a servant. No decisions made about my movements without my consent. Beatrix lifted her chin, feeling the weight of what she was about to say next. And when this ends, when Ashfield is dealt with, you will not expect me to vanish quietly, so you may return to a life untouched by the scandal you began at Almack's. Hadrian was quiet for a long moment, studying her, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. And what do you expect instead? He asked, voice soft, but not gentle. There was too much steel in it for gentleness. Beatrix's fingers tightened on the desk edge. I expect to have a choice in what I become next. Not to be discarded, not to be forgotten, not to return to my parents' house as if this were all a strange dream that can be swept under carpets and never spoken of again. 3 months, Hadrian said, each word deliberate, and said each word. We end him by the new year. Beatrix extended her hand across the desk, not bare this time, but properly gloved, because this was a contract, and contracts required formality. Hadrian took it. His grip was firm, his palm warm, even through 2 layers of kid leather. The contact should have been nothing more than ceremony, nothing more than sealing an agreement, but instead it sent a current up her arm that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way his thumb brushed across her knuckles once briefly before he released her. She leaned forward slightly close enough that she could smell the faint scent of bergamot and leather that clung to him. You kissed me in public, Your Grace, she said, voice low enough that the chaperone pretending to read book spines could not hear. Do not hide behind closed doors now. Do not turn me into a secret after making me a spectacle. Hadrian's answer came as a short exhale caught somewhere between a laugh and a warning. I won't. 4 days later, Lady Winifred Blackmere hosted an at-home, and Beatrix attended on Hadrian's arm because the charade had officially begun. The drawing room was full of ladies in afternoon dresses, like a garden of poisonous flowers, beautiful, carefully arranged, and deadly if handled carelessly. Teacups chimed softly like tiny bells rung before a funeral. Conversations floated on air thick with the scent of hothouse roses and expensive perfume. Eyes tracked Beatrix's entrance with the focused intensity of predators watching prey enter their territory. Marquess Delaney appeared at her elbow as if summoned by the promise of entertainment. He bowed over her hand with exaggerated courtesy, his lips hovering just above her glove, lingering too long, a calculated insult disguised as manners. "A kiss is not a promise, Lady Beatrix," he murmured, voice pitched for her ears alone, but loud enough that the nearest ladies could hear if they strained. One might still be spared certain embarrassments. Allow me to offer my assistance in navigating these difficult waters. Beatrix withdrew her hand, with a sharp motion that left his fingers grasping empty air. The rejection was visible, unmistakable, and entirely deliberate. "Spare me, my lord," she said, her voice sweet as honey laced with arsenic. "From your particular brand of entertainment." A titter ran through the nearby cluster of ladies, half scandalized, half delighted. A matron's eyes widened behind her fan. Hadrian materialized at Beatrix's shoulder with the silent inevitability of a storm cloud. He did not touch her, but his presence alone shifted the air, made the space feel smaller and more dangerous. "Walk away, Delaney," he said, voice conversational, almost pleasant, and therefore utterly terrifying. Delaney's smile widened, showing teeth. His eyes glittered with the particular pleasure of a man who enjoyed prodding at power to see if it would bite. "Is she yours, then, Your Grace?" Hadrian's response came swift and clean as a blade drawn from a sheath. "Not yours." The two words fell like a gavel final, and without appeal. Beatrix stepped deliberately between the two men, forcing them both to acknowledge her presence, refusing to be discussed, as if she were a piece of property, whose ownership was under dispute. The room's attention sharpened dozens of eyes, fixing on her with hungry interest. "I am not property to be argued over like a plot of disputed land," she said clearly, her voice carrying farther than she intended, filling spaces between conversations and making other discussions falter. "If either of you wishes to speak about me, you may address me directly rather than conducting negotiations over my head." Fans snapped shut. Teacups paused halfway to lips. The hush that fell was different from the one at Almack's. This was the silence of society witnessing a woman refusing her assigned role. Several ladies near the window turned their backs in perfect unison, a choreographed rejection. A hostess across the room caught Winifred's eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A calling card withdrawn, an invitation rescinded before it was even offered. By the time Beatrix left Winifred's at-home an hour later, her list of female allies had shrunk to almost nothing. The price of defiance, she was learning, was paid in isolation. That night, her father stood gray-faced in the entrance hall of their home, unable to meet her eyes. "Lady Jersey has withdrawn her voucher for next season," he said, voice hollow. "For your sisters as well." Beatrix felt the words land like blows to her sister's futures. Guilt twisted in her stomach, but she kept her spine straight. "I am sorry they must pay for my choices." Her father's mouth worked, but no sound emerged. He turned and walked away, shoulders bowed under the weight of social death that spread through families like plague. Her mother had stopped speaking to her entirely. Beatrix ate dinner alone in her room. Hope brought the tray and stayed sitting on the floor with her back against the door like a guard dog. And they did not speak because there was nothing to say that would make it better. The journey to Blackmere Hall in mid-May took place under gray skies that threatened rain, but had not yet delivered. The carriage smelled of damp wool and horse leather, and the particular mustiness of a vehicle that had been closed up through winter and was now being aired for spring travel. Beatrix sat with the ledger balanced on her knees, reviewing estate accounts that Radley had sent ahead for her inspection. Numbers marched down pages in neat columns, and she found comfort in their orderliness, in the way they told stories, if you knew how to read them properly. Hadrian sat across from her, one hand braced against the window frame to steady himself against the carriages lurching over rutted roads. He watched her read with an expression she could not quite decipher, something between suspicion and curiosity, as if he had not expected her to actually understand estate management. Winifred occupied the corner seat with the air of a general surveying a battlefield. Her eyes were half-lidded, but Beatrix knew she was missing nothing, not the way Beatrix's finger traced down columns, not the way Hadrian's gaze lingered on Beatrix's bent head, not the tension that sang in the air between them, like a plucked string. The carriage hit a particularly deep rut. The inkpot on the small folding desk lurched violently. Hadrian's hand shot out, catching it before it could spill, his fingers brushing Beatrix's wrist, where her glove ribbon had worked loose during the journey. The contact lasted only a heartbeat, but Beatrix felt it like a brand sudden heat against the cool skin of her inner wrist, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with the pulse that jumped under his fingers before she could control it. She pulled her hand back and retied the ribbon with calm precision, refusing to let him see that the brief touch had affected her. Her fingers were steady, her expression composed, but her heart hammered against her ribs with traitorous enthusiasm. "You read figures like a magistrate reads faces," Hadrian observed, his voice carefully neutral. "And you threaten like a man who thinks kindness is a trap set by enemies." Beatrix replied without looking up from the ledger, her tone matching his for blandness. Across from them, Winifred's fan moved in a slow, pleased arc. Her mouth curved slightly at the corners, not quite a smile, but close. Half a mile from the estate, a rider met them, a young groom mud-splattered to the knees, his horse blowing hard from a gallop. He pulled up alongside the carriage, and the driver called a halt. Hadrian leaned out the window. "What news?" The groom handed up a sealed note, then fell back to follow at a more sedate pace. Hadrian broke the seal plain red wax, not black-edged, which meant urgent business rather than social correspondence, and read in silence. His expression did not change, but Beatrix watched his knuckles whiten on the paper's edge, watched his mouth become a hard, flat line. "What is it?" Winifred asked sharply. Hadrian folded the note once precisely, as if he could contain its contents through sheer force of will. "Lady Pomeroy has returned all calling cards sent from this house. She regrets she cannot be seen to encourage her daughter's excess and imprudence." The words fell into the carriage like stones into still water. Beatrix felt them sink into her chest, cold and heavy. Her mother had cut her. Not quietly, not privately, but in a way calculated to be known throughout London by nightfall. In society's arithmetic, this meant Beatrix was not merely scandalous, she was disposable. Even her own family had decided she cost more than she was worth. Hadrian's voice came flat hard as coffin nails. "Cowardice." Beatrix lifted her chin, though it cost her more than she would ever admit aloud. The gray sky outside blurred slightly, but she blinked and it steadied. "She thinks the Tun will forgive her if she makes it clear I acted without her blessing. She is sacrificing me, so my sisters might still have chances." The words came out steadier than she felt. "It is practical in its way." Hadrian's gaze cut to her, sharp enough to draw blood. "It is cruelty disguised as practicality." "Sometimes," Beatrix said quietly, looking down at the ledger in her lap, because meeting his eyes felt too raw just now. "They are the same thing." The carriage rolled forward again, carrying them toward Blackmere Hall, while behind them in London, her mother was likely already composing letters to distant relatives, explaining how she had done everything possible. But some daughters simply could not be guided. Inside the carriage, silence settled like snow-cold muffling, impossible to shake off. Blackmere Hall rose from the Kent countryside like something built to withstand sieges, all grey stone and narrow windows, and an air of having survived too much history to be impressed by the present. The entrance hall smelled of beeswax and old stone, and the afternoon light filtering through high windows turned the marble floor into a chessboard. That evening, the library became their planning room, their headquarters for strategy, witnesses, and proof. The library at dusk was a cathedral to order and old wealth. Candles threw golden light across leather spines, stamped with gilt across the turkey carpet, worn smooth by generations of boots across the massive desk that dominated the center of the room like an altar. Felix Radley laid out estate account ledgers with the precision of a man building a legal case. Each book aligned each loose paper, weighted with smooth river stones so they would not shift in the draft from the windows. Hadrian stood at the head of the table with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture military straight, his face carved from restraint. Winifred sat to one side, fan moving in slow arcs that stirred the warm air without cooling it. Hope moved quietly along the shelves, ostensibly dusting, but actually listening with the focused intensity of a hunting dog on point. Beatrix sat before the ledgers with her gloves removed for better control of the pages. Her bare hands looked strangely bold against the solemn leather and parchment, as if she had brought an indecency into the heart of tradition. Radley pointed with his pen to a column of figures. These are the Michaelmas rents collected from the southern tenant farms. The sums match expected amounts based on acreage and yield. Beatrix's eyes moved down the page, quick and methodical. She had taught herself accounts out of boredom during long afternoons, when she was not invited to calls, had learned numbers because they at least did not mock her. Her finger stopped hovering over an entry. "These rents are recorded twice," she said. Hadrian leaned forward, shadow falling across the page. "Show me." Beatrix slid the ledger toward him, her bare finger pointing to 2 entries separated by 3 days. Here, September 28th, and here October 1st. Same tenant, same amount to the penny, but different signatures witnessing the payment. Radley's brows drew together. He pulled another ledger toward him, flipping pages rapidly. "That is impossible. Tenants pay once per quarter, and I witness every transaction myself." Beatrix picked up a loose receipt from the pile beside the ledgers and held it up to the candlelight. The paper was good quality, the ink dark and firm, but the wax seal impressed at the bottom caught the light strangely. "This seal is pressed too shallow," she observed. "The crest is visible, but the depth is wrong. It looks—" She paused, choosing her words, with the care of someone walking through a room full of traps. "It looks as though someone used a copy of the seal die rather than the original, or pressed without sufficient force because they feared breaking a die that was not theirs to break." Hadrian's signet ring, the very ring that should have made the proper impression, hovered over the receipt for a long moment, then withdrew without touching. He stared at the false seal as if it might suddenly sprout teeth and bite him. Radley's voice came tight as a drawn bowstring. "That seal is not mine, Your Grace." Hadrian's gaze snapped up. "Then whose is it?" "I cannot say without examining the die itself. But if someone has made a copy—" Radley trailed off the implications, hanging heavy in the candlelit air. Winifred's fan snapped shut with a sound like a judge's gavel. "So, someone is altering your accounts to create confusion," she said, "and practicing your seals to create forgeries. This is not the work of a moment. This is patient, careful preparation for something larger." Hope's voice came from near the bookshelves, quiet but carrying in the still air. "Servants have been whispering in the kitchens, Your Grace. About a gentleman who came last month when you were in London, tall, well-dressed, smiling a great deal. He was shown into your study by Mr. Carter. Hadrian's head turned sharply enough that Beatrix heard his neck crack. "Carter." His voice had gone very soft, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had shouted. Radley straightened, as if called to attention. "Carter is the under-steward. He has managed the lower estate accounts for 7 years. I would have trusted him with—" He stopped, realizing what he was about to say, what it meant that trust had been misplaced. "Bring him," Hadrian ordered. "Now." Within minutes, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, too quick, almost stumbling. The library door opened to admit Mr. Carter, a man of middle years, with thinning hair and eyes that darted like cornered animals. He was already sweating despite the cool evening air, and the sheen on his forehead caught the candlelight as he bowed too quickly, too deeply, desperation making him clumsy. Hadrian did not offer him a chair, did not offer him anything but silence, which stretched until Carter began to shake. "You received a visitor last month," Hadrian said finally, each word dropped like a stone into still water. Not a question, a statement of fact that demanded only confirmation or denial. Carter swallowed hard enough that his throat clicked. "A gentleman, Your Grace." He said he was sent from London with questions about the estate accounts. Official business. He had papers. He had— What papers? Hadrian's voice did not rise, but the cold in it would have frozen summer roses in full bloom. Carter's hands twisted together, fingers knotting and unknotting. "A letter, Your Grace. With your seal? Your signature. Ordering me to show him the account books and answer his questions about tenant payments and the deed records." His voice cracked on the last words. Beatrix's eyes flicked to Hadrian's signet ring, then to Radley. The implication was sharp as a blade drawn in darkness. Someone had used Hadrian's seal to forge an order, and this fool had followed it without question. "Did you keep this letter?" Beatrix asked, her voice cutting through Carter's stammering like clean steel. Carter's gaze jerked to her, startled at being addressed by a woman in what he clearly considered men's business. His mouth opened and closed. "No, my lady. The gentleman, he took it back with him. Said it contained sensitive information that could not be left lying about. I thought—" "You thought what was convenient rather than what was true." Winifred interrupted, her voice dripping with contempt that could strip paint. "You thought your laziness and lack of diligence would go unnoticed." Carter's face crumpled. "I meant no harm. I swear on my mother's grave, Your Grace, I did not know." "Describe him," Hadrian commanded, voice sharp as breaking glass. "This gentleman. Every detail." Carter's hands shook as he pressed them against his sides, trying to still their trembling. "Tall, Your Grace. Perhaps 40 years of age. Well-dressed, very fine coat, blue, superfine with brass buttons. Fair hair going silver at the temples. Smiling. Always smiling, even when he asked uncomfortable questions." He swallowed again. "Baron Frederick Ashfield, he said his name was. Said he was looking into estate management practices for a committee in the Lords." The name fell into the library like a curse spoken aloud in church. Winifred's eyes flashed with something savage. "The smiling predator walks into your house, and your under-steward bows him through the door and hands him your throat to cut." Hadrian took one step toward Carter. Only one. But Carter stumbled backward as if shoved, catching himself against a chair. "You will not speak of this conversation to anyone," Hadrian said, voice dropping even quieter, even more deadly. "Not to a servant, not to your wife, not to the parish vicar when he comes to hear your confession, not to the cat sleeping in the kitchen. If I hear of one whisper, one single word reaching ears beyond this room, You will be dismissed without character and prosecuted for criminal negligence of your duties. Do I make myself clear?" Carter nodded frantically, sweat now running down his temples. "Yes, Your Grace. Perfectly clear. Not a word, I swear it." Hadrian flicked his hand in dismissal, and Carter fled like a rabbit from hawks, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to escape. The door closed. The candles guttered slightly in the draught. The library settled back into its watchful silence. Beatrix looked down at the shallow seal impression again, and then up at Hadrian's face. "He has been inside your house," she said quietly. "He has touched your papers, examined your accounts, taken notes, surely. He knows the shape of your affairs better than most of your friends do." Radley's voice was grim as a death sentence. "If Baron Ashfield has obtained an impression of your Grace's seal and had a die made, he can stamp lies until they look like law. He can create false documents, false debts, false claims. He can forge anything he pleases." Hadrian's fist closed on empty air beside his thigh knuckles, whitening with the force of it. "Then we find the die," he said, "before he uses it to hang us all from our own seals." Hope spoke again from her position near the shelves. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace, but if the Baron has a die made, he would not carry it on his person. Too dangerous. He would hide it somewhere safe. Somewhere he has control." "London," Winifred said. "His own house most likely. Or perhaps with a solicitor who asks no uncomfortable questions." Beatrix studied the account ledgers, the false seal, the careful trail of forgery that Ashfield had begun laying months ago. "He is not merely threatening you," she said slowly, pieces clicking together in her mind like the works of a clock. "He is building a case, evidence that can be shown in court or in the Lords. He means to strip you of everything title estate's reputation, and he is being patient about it." Hadrian's gaze met hers across the desk, gray eyes reflecting candlelight like steel reflecting flame. "Then we stop being patient in return," he said. The next afternoon brought rain that turned the parkland around Blackmere Hall into a watercolor all soft edges and bleeding greens. Beatrix found herself drawn to the orangery, a glass and iron structure attached to the south wing, where citrus trees grew in massive pots, and the air was perpetually warm and damp. She stood among the trees with a page from the account ledgers in her hand, studying the false signature again in the better light that filtered through the rain-washed glass. The air smelled of blossoms and wet earth and something faintly bitter, perhaps, the fear she was trying to hold at bay. The iron door opened with a creak that sounded loud in the enclosed space. Hadrian stepped through his coat darkened with rain, smelling of wet wool and horse and leather. Real things, solid things that anchored the world when paper lies threatened to unmake it. "You should not speak of what we found last night beyond these walls," he said without preamble, his voice echoing slightly in the high glass space. Beatrix did not turn at first. She continued studying the paper, though the signature had long since stopped revealing new secrets. "Stop treating truth like a fever that might spread if I open my mouth carelessly." She heard him move closer, felt the shift in the air when he came to stand just behind her left shoulder, close enough that she could sense his body heat in the already warm orangery. "Truth is a blade," he said, voice low and rough. "It cuts the hand that wields it as cleanly as it cuts the enemy." Beatrix turned, then forcing him to either step back or maintain the too close distance. He did not step back. They stood with perhaps 18 inches between them and the paper clenched in her hand, his coat dripping rainwater onto the tile floor. "Then hold the blade properly instead of flinching every time someone mentions drawing it," she said, lifting the page between them like evidence in a trial. Hadrian's eyes tracked the movement, then rose to meet hers. This close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, could see the way his pupils dilated slightly in the greenish light, filtering through leaves and glass. "You speak as if this were simple." "I speak as if I am tired of silence," Beatrix replied. "Silence protected me for 15 years, Your Grace. Do you know what it earned me? Nothing. Less than nothing it taught them. I could be hurt without cost, mocked without consequences, dismissed without a second thought." Hadrian's hand rose. She watched it lift as if in slow motion and hovered near her cheek. His fingers trembled with the effort of restraint, with wanting to touch and knowing he should not. Not here, not like this. "If we speak too openly, Ashfield will know we are hunting him. He will destroy evidence. Flee to the continent. Find new ways to strike at us from where we cannot reach. And if we are too cautious," Beatrix countered, not moving away from his almost touch, "he will bleed you slowly until there is nothing left but scandal and bankruptcy and a ruined title." His hand dropped. He took a breath that seemed to cost him something. "You want war. I want air." Beatrix said the words coming out sharper than she intended, edged with the frustration of weeks spent being careful, being proper, being silent, when every instinct screamed to shout. "I want to stop carrying secrets like stones in my pockets, weighing me down until I can barely move. I want—" She stopped because footsteps sounded on the iron walkway outside the orangery. The door opened. Lady Winifred stood in the doorway, with her fan raised, her eyes glittering in the watery light. Behind her, visible through the glass, a footman had stopped dead on the path, young eyes wide mouth slightly open as he stared at the Duke, and the unchaperoned lady standing too close together among the orange trees, with rain falling all around their glass shelter. The footman had seen them alone, standing nearer than propriety allowed, the intimacy of their posture unmistakable, even from outside. Winifred's smile was lethal as poison stirred into wine. "How delightful," she said loudly enough for the footman to hear clearly through the glass. "I was hoping to find you both here. The light is so much better for examining documents, is it not?" She stepped fully into the orangery and let the door fall shut behind her with a clang that made the young footman jump, her gaze fixed on him through the glass with the focused intensity of a raptor selecting prey. The footman swallowed visibly, backed up a step, fled toward the house with the awkward speed of someone who knows he has witnessed something he should not have. Winifred turned back to them, and her expression had shifted from lethal amusement to something colder. "That boy will talk," she said flatly. "By dinner, half the household will know you are alone in here. By tomorrow, a letter will reach London. By week's end, every drawing room in Mayfair will be whispering about improper proximity." Beatrix felt her stomach drop. This was different from Almack's. This was not a public gesture that could be framed as scandalous, but ultimately defensible. This was private, unchaperoned, the sort of thing that ruined women, absolutely. Hadrian's jaw set hard enough that she could see the muscle jump. "I will speak to him. Ensure his silence." "You cannot," Winifred said. "If you threaten him directly, he will be more certain there was something worth hiding. If you pay him, he will know the information has value." She snapped her fan open with a sound like breaking bones. "The gossip will spread. You must decide how to use it rather than trying to contain it." Beatrix looked from Winifred to Hadrian and back. Her hands had gone cold despite the orangery's warmth, but she kept her voice steady. "Then we confirm it." Both of them looked at her sharply. "We confirm that we were here together." Beatrix continued mind-racing ahead to implications and counter-moves. "We confirm that His Grace is courting me seriously enough that certain liberties of proximity are understood to be leading toward a formal arrangement. We make it clear this was not an indiscretion, but a step toward something legitimate. Hadrian's eyes narrowed. That will not stop the gossip. It will feed it. Yes, Beatrix agreed. But it will change the nature of the gossip from ruin to speculation about timing. The Tun can forgive almost anything if it thinks a wedding will follow to make everything proper. Winifred studied Beatrix with the assessing gaze of a general evaluating a potentially useful weapon. That is remarkably cold-blooded child. Beatrix met her eyes. I learned from cold-blooded masters. A brief pause. Then Winifred's mouth curved in something that was not quite approval, but was close. Very well. Then the story we tell is this: His Grace is courting you with serious intent. Certain small improprieties of time and place may be forgiven in light of the understanding that exists between you. She turned to Hadrian, which means, nephew, that you must act as though such an understanding actually exists. No more wavering, no more hesitation. You have declared yourself publicly. Now you must follow through privately, or the Tun will smell uncertainty and tear you both apart. Hadrian's fist clenched at his side. Rain drummed on the glass roof above them, a constant reminder that weather, unlike society, did not care about human scandal. 3 months, he said finally, voice hard as iron. We will end Ashfield by Christmas, and then we will see what remains. Beatrix finished for him, because she was not fool enough to believe he had actually offered her anything beyond strategy dressed as courtship. The orangery felt smaller suddenly, the air too close, the scent of blossoms cloying rather than sweet. But the scandal had been set in motion. The footman's witness would spread like oil on water. And there was no calling it back now. 2 days later, Hope came to Beatrix's chamber with news whispered through the servants' networks that ran beneath the surface of great houses like underground rivers. There is talk, Hope said quietly, closing the door and checking that no one lingered in the corridor outside. Mr. Carter has been whispering to the grooms about visitors, and one of the upstairs maids says she found a gentleman's calling card in the waste bin of the blue guest chamber, the room that was opened and aired last month when His Grace was in London. Beatrix set down her book. Show me. Hope produced a crumpled card from her apron pocket. The name was printed in elegant script, Baron Frederick Ashfield. He stayed here, Beatrix breathed. As a guest. Not official-like, Hope clarified. More like he arrived, claimed urgent business, stayed one night, and left before anyone thought to mention it to His Grace upon his return. Mr. Carter handled everything quietly, said the Baron was on estate business and needed to review documents that could not be removed from the premises. Beatrix's hands went cold as she smoothed out the calling card. He had hours alone in this house. Access to every room, every paper, every seal and signature. And that is not all, my lady. Hope's voice dropped even lower. I followed Mr. Sayre, His Grace's valet, yesterday evening. He went to the linen storage. I heard him moving things about. When I checked later, there were papers hidden beneath the spare sheets, old papers that smell like London and ink and secrets. Show me where. They moved through the house like shadows, using servants' stairs and back corridors. The linen storage was a narrow room that smelled of lavender and starch. Hope indicated a shelf high enough that most maids would not think to check it carefully. Beatrix reached up, feeling behind the stacks of folded linen. Her fingers touched paper-thick, expensive paper that did not belong in a linen cupboard. She pulled it free, unfolded it by the light of Hope's candle. A marriage settlement draft, half-signed, carrying details that could be twisted, misunderstood, made to look suspicious if presented without context. And beneath it, folded smaller, but somehow weighing more heavily in her hands, despite being lighter, a letter in handwriting gone brown with age. The seal was the old Duke of Blackmere's. The signature at the bottom was the same. Beatrix read it once, twice. Her throat went dry as dust. It was a confession, written years ago apparently to a solicitor. The late Duke of Blackmere acknowledged payment made to a young woman of good family who had borne him a child out of wedlock, a son older than Hadrian by 2 years, whose existence had been hidden, and whose mother had been paid handsomely to remove herself to Ireland and never speak of it again. If this letter were made public, if it were shown in the Lords or whispered in drawing rooms, the implications would be devastating. Questions about legitimacy. Questions about whether the current Duke had usurped his elder half-brother's rightful place. Questions that could tie up the estate in chancery for decades while courts tried to untangle truth from rumor. Sweet heaven, Beatrix whispered. Hope's face had gone pale. That is treason against the house, my lady. Stealing private letters. Stolen by Mr. Essayé, Beatrix said mind-racing, who was bribed or threatened by Ashfield to take it. But why hide it here instead of delivering it immediately? Perhaps he is waiting, Hope suggested. Waiting for the right moment, or waiting for more money, or waiting for the Baron to tell him when. Beatrix folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bodice. We must tell his grace. Now. They found Hadrian in the study with Radley reviewing more accounts by lamplight, though it was well past midnight. Both men looked up sharply when Beatrix entered without knocking Hope at her heels. Your valet is a spy, Beatrix said without preamble. And Ashfield has more than a forged seal. He has this. She pulled the letter from her bodice and laid it on the desk between them. Hadrian's face went utterly still as he read. No expression, no movement. But something behind his eyes, something cold and old and bitter, stirred like a beast waking from hibernation. Radley read over his shoulder, his face drained of color. Your Grace, if this becomes public, I know what it means. Hadrian cut him off, voice flat as death. Beatrix watched him carefully. Watched for the moment when control would crack, when the Duke's mask would slip and she would see the man beneath. It did not come. Instead, Hadrian refolded the letter with precise movements and placed it in a drawer that he locked with a key from his waistcoat pocket. Bring Say, he said. Quietly. Tell him his presence is required for fitting a new coat. Do not alarm him. Radley nodded and vanished. In the silence that followed, Beatrix realized she was alone with Hadrian for the first time since the orangery. The study smelled of leather and lamp oil, and the faint, bitter scent of the ink used for estate business. Your father's secret, she said quietly because someone needed to name the thing that lay between them like an unexploded shell. My father's sin. Hadrian corrected voice, empty of everything, but tired honesty. He was not the first Duke to father an illegitimate child, and he will not be the last. But he was fool enough to write it down, to confess in ink instead of simply paying and staying silent. And now Ashfield will use it to destroy everything he built, everything I have spent 7 years trying to protect. Beatrix heard the exhaustion in his voice, the weight of inheritance that felt more like curse than blessing. Ashfield does not want your title for himself, she said slowly, working through the logic. He wants to control you, to make you pay forever. The threat is more valuable than the revelation. Unless I refuse to pay, then he will burn it all down simply to prove he can. Footsteps in the corridor. The door opened to admit Radley with Mr. Say in tow. The valet looked nervous, but not yet terrified that would come in a moment. Hope stepped out from behind the door where she had been waiting and closed it firmly, standing with her back against it like a guard. Sayé's eyes widened when he saw her, when he realized this was not about a coat fitting. Your Grace, He began. Where did you hide the papers? Hadrian asked, voice quiet and terrible, and Sayé's mouth opened and closed. Sweat began to bead on his forehead despite the cool night air seeping through the windows. Beatrix pulled out the letter and the settlement draft from where she had tucked them temporarily back into her bodice and placed them on the desk before him. We have already found them, she said. The question is whether you confess willingly or must be compelled. Sayé's legs gave out. He collapsed more than sat in the chair Radley pushed beneath him. He promised my brother's debts would be cleared, he whispered, voice breaking. £700. The moneylenders were threatening, said they would take his shop, throw him in debtor's prison. Baron Ashfield said if I simply found certain papers, copied them, and waited for his signal to deliver them. You sold your master's blood for coin, Hadrian said, and the judgment in his voice was colder than any shout could have been. I did not know it would. I thought... Sayé's hands twisted together. I thought perhaps it was a legal dispute, something for solicitors to handle. I did not know the Baron meant ruin. Winifred's voice came from the doorway. She must have been summoned by a servant, or perhaps simply sensed blood in the water. She swept into the study with her fan already deployed. The Baron meant utter ruin, and you chose your brother's shop over your master's house. Sayé sobbed once, a humiliating sound that made Beatrix look away. She felt no pity for him. He had chosen betrayal, but the sound of a man breaking was never pleasant to witness. Hadrian's voice cut through the weeping. Radley, bind him. We will hold him here until we determine what other papers he may have stolen or copied. Hope. But Hope was already moving, crossing to Hadrian's desk and pulling open drawers with the efficiency of someone who knew what she was looking for. The strongbox, Your Grace. Check the strongbox. Radley fetched the key from Hadrian's study safe and opened the iron strongbox that sat in a recessed cabinet. He went through the contents, methodically checking papers against the inventory list, kept separate. His face went from pale to gray. The deed is missing. Which deed? Hadrian asked, though Beatrix could tell from his voice that he already knew, already understood that Ashfield had gone for the throat. The original deed to the Blackmere estate, Your Grace. The founding document from when the first Duke received the lands from Charles II. Without it, ownership becomes murky. With it, Baron Ashfield can claim almost anything that the document shows different terms than the family believes that there were conditions not met that I am not the rightful Duke, Hadrian finished. His hand closed into a fist on the desk knuckles, whitening with the force of it. For a heartbeat, Beatrix thought he might strike the wood, might let rage spill out into violence. Instead, he released the fist slowly, finger by finger, and his voice came out controlled. Too controlled. The kind of control that said violence was being leashed by willpower alone. Then we return to London. We force this into the open. We make Ashfield come to us on ground we choose with witnesses we select. Beatrix felt her heart begin to pound. You mean a ball? Hadrian said. We host a ball. We invite everyone who matters. We set the stage. And when Ashfield makes his move because he will not be able to resist making it in front of an audience, we cut him down where the entire ton can watch. Winifred's smile was savage as a winter storm. Now you are thinking like a duke, whose ancestors survived court intrigue and civil war. Radley bound Sayé's wrists with cord meant for parcels. The valet's sobs had quieted to shaking silence. What will you do with him, Your Grace? Keep him here, under guard. He is evidence, and he will testify if I must drag him before a magistrate. Hadrian turned to face them all. We leave for London at dawn. Begin preparations. Send word ahead that Blackmere House will host a ball on the 15th of October. Spare no expense. Make it the event of the season. The ton will be suspicious, Winifred warned. They will wonder why you are suddenly so generous with entertainments when you have avoided them for years. Hadrian's eyes found Beatrix held her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. We are celebrating my impending betrothal. Let them whisper about that instead of wondering about my motives. Beatrix felt the words land like a physical thing, not a question, not a request, a statement, a weapon. She lifted her chin. Then we had best make certain they believe it. The journey back to London took 2 days through weather that could not decide between rain and clearing. They arrived at Blackmere Townhouse to find the staff already in a frenzy of preparation for a ball that was usually planned months in advance, not thrown together in a fortnight. Beatrix took temporary residence in the guest wing with Hope as her chaperone because propriety still demanded certain forms, even when those forms were being bent to breaking. But she spent her days in Hadrian's study, reviewing papers, writing invitations in her careful hand, planning the evening that would either save them or destroy them both. 10 days before the ball, Mushfield's next letter arrived. Black-edged, heavily sealed, delivered by a boy who vanished into Mayfair's crowds before he could be questioned. Hadrian opened it in Beatrix's presence because they had moved past the pretense that this was his battle alone. The letter was brief. Ashfield's handwriting had lost its earlier smoothness. Now it looked rushed, aggressive, triumphant. Your Grace, I find myself in possession of certain documents that cast interesting light on your late father's private affairs. I also possess the original deed to your estate, which seems to have gone missing from your strongbox. Carelessness, surely. You may retrieve both items from me at a cost we shall discuss, or you may choose to proceed without them and see what the lords make of your claim to a title when foundational documents cannot be produced. I suggest we meet privately to arrange terms. Unless, of course, you prefer I make my findings public at your upcoming ball, which I have heard so much about. I have naturally accepted the invitation you were kind enough to send. Your servant Frederick Ashfield. Beatrix read over Hadrian's shoulder. He is coming to the ball. He will not be able to resist the theater of it. He plans to expose me in front of everyone, Hadrian said. He wants an audience for my destruction. Then we give him an audience, Beatrix replied, and we ensure the performance ends differently than he expects. Hadrian turned to face her. They stood close enough that she could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes, could see the way his jaw had been clenched so long there were shadows of strain in his face. If this fails, he said quietly, you will be ruined alongside me. Your association with my name will be permanent. You cannot walk away from that. Beatrix felt the weight of choice settle on her shoulders. Real choice, not the illusion of it that society usually offered women. She could withdraw now, return to her parents' house and beg forgiveness, live small and quiet and safe. Or she could stay and risk everything for a chance at something larger. I stopped being able to walk away the moment I removed my glove at Almack's, she said. I am already ruined, Your Grace. The only question is whether I am ruined as a coward or as someone who chose her battles. Something shifted in his eyes, something that looked almost like gratitude, almost like respect, almost like something more dangerous than either. His hand lifted, hovered near her face, and this time it did not fall away. His fingertips brushed her cheek with a feather-light touch that made her breath stop entirely. May I? He asked, voice rough as gravel. She nodded, not trusting words. He cupped her face with one hand, properly fully his thumb stroking along her cheekbone, with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about dukes and power and control. And then he leaned down and kissed her. Not like at Almack's, where it had been performance and scandal and statement. This was private, slow, achingly careful, as if he were learning her, as if he had been wanting to do this for weeks, and was only now allowing himself the luxury. Beatrix's hands came up to grip his coat, partly for balance, and partly because, if she did not hold on to something, she might dissolve into the sensation of his mouth on hers, warm and firm, and tasting faintly of the tea he had been drinking. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers for a heartbeat. His breath came uneven, and she could feel the restraint it cost him to stop, to not pull her closer, to remember that there were rules, even in rebellion. "We will be careful," he murmured against her temple. "And we will be bold." "Yes." Beatrix agreed, voice shaking slightly, despite her best efforts at composure. They stepped apart before anyone could walk in, before the moment could be witnessed and added to the growing pile of scandal that threatened to bury them. But Beatrix's lips felt warm for hours afterward, and she caught herself touching them with her fingertips when she thought no one was looking. The ball arrived like an execution date, fixed, inevitable, carrying the weight of everything that would be decided in a single night. Blackmere townhouse blazed with hundreds of candles, their light harsh enough to show every flaw, every bead of sweat, every tremor of fear. The ballroom smelled of crushed flowers and hot wax and expensive perfume worn by people who had come to witness either a triumph or a disaster. Beatrix wore scarlet, the same shade she had worn to Almack's, because she refused to apologize for it in fabric or any other way. The black velvet ribbon sat beneath her bust like a declaration. One glove fitted properly. The other she had deliberately loosened at the wrist, a small preparation for what might come. Hadrian stood beside her at the entrance to the ballroom, his arm beneath her hand, rigid as iron. He wore black tonight, as if preparing for a funeral, perhaps his own. His face was a mask carved from control, but Beatrix could feel the tension vibrating through him, like a plucked string about to snap. Winifred watched from her position near the orchestra, like a general surveying a battlefield. Radley moved through the crowd, with documents hidden inside his coat. Hope skimmed the edges of the room eyes, everywhere missing nothing. Lady Eloise stood with a cluster of young women, pale but upright, her hands folded to stop their shaking. She had been told enough to know tonight would determine her future as much as her brother's. The guests arrived in a glittering flood, duchesses and earls viscounts and their scheming wives, younger sons hunting for heiresses, unmarried girls hunting for anyone. They came for spectacle, some hoping to witness a betrothal announcement, others hoping to see the proud Duke of Blackmere brought low by scandal. Marquis Delaney arrived fashionably late, his eyes bright with anticipation. He bowed over Beatrix's hand with exaggerated courtesy, and she felt the familiar revulsion of his touch, even through her glove. "I came for a ball," he murmured, "and I suspect I shall witness far more interesting entertainment." Beatrix withdrew her hand coldly. "Then I hope you are not disappointed, my lord." He smiled and drifted away to watch from a position near the card tables, where he would have an excellent view of whatever drama unfolded. And then, precisely at 10 o'clock, Baron Frederick Ashfield arrived. He wore blue superfine with brass buttons that caught the light, his fair hair silvering at the temples, his face arranged in the pleasant smile of a man attending a friendly gathering. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm, casual, almost careless, as if it contained nothing more threatening than sheet music or architectural drawings. But Beatrix knew better. That portfolio held their destruction carefully documented and ready to be displayed. Ashfield made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations from acquaintances, pausing to admire a lady's gown, stopping to share a jest with a gentleman. He was in no hurry. He wanted to savor this. Finally, he reached the space near the musicians' dais, where Beatrix and Hadrian stood receiving guests. The crowd around them had thinned slightly, as people drifted toward the refreshment tables, but enough remained to serve as witnesses. Perfect witnesses from Ashfield's perspective. He bowed with perfect courtesy. Your Grace, Lady Beatrix, what a delightful gathering. Hadrian's voice came flat. Ashfield. The Baron's smile widened fractionally. He glanced around at the assembled company, at the watchful eyes and listening ears, and seemed satisfied with his audience. I wonder if I might have a private word, a matter of business that cannot wait, I fear. Speak here, Hadrian said. I conduct no private business tonight. Ashfield's eyebrows rose with feigned surprise. Surely your Grace would prefer discretion for what I must discuss. I prefer witnesses, Hadrian replied. Speak or depart. A hush began to spread outward from their conversation, like ripples from a stone thrown in still water. Guests stopped mid-sentence. Fans paused, heads turned. Ashfield's smile thinned, but he had come too far to back away now. He opened his portfolio with deliberate slowness and drew out a sheaf of papers. Very well, he said, voice carrying beautifully in the growing silence. Since your Grace insists on openness, let us be open. I have here certain documents that I believe the assembled company will find most illuminating. He held up the first paper-aged parchment that Beatrix recognized even from across the space between them. The deed. The original Blackmere estate deed. This document, Ashfield announced, which I have recently come into possession of through entirely legitimate channels, contains some fascinating provisions. Provisions regarding the inheritance of the dukedom that call into question certain assumptions about legitimacy and succession. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Winifred's fan snapped open with a sound like breaking bone. Hadrian stood utterly still. Beatrix felt rather than saw his control tighten like a vice. Ashfield was warming to his performance now. He drew out a second paper, a letter in faded ink. And this remarkable letter, written by the late Duke of Blackmere, confesses to certain indiscretions that produced an heir whose existence has been carefully concealed. An older heir, ladies and gentlemen, older than our current Duke. The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. Delaney leaned forward with undisguised fascination. Several matrons looked as though they might faint from the delicious scandal of it all. Baron Ashfield, Hadrian said, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. You are displaying stolen property and making accusations based on documents you obtained through bribery and theft. Stolen. Ashfield's expression was all wounded innocence. I assure you these came to me through perfectly legal means. If your strongbox was insufficiently secured, that is hardly my fault. He turned to address the crowd more broadly, playing to them now. I wonder what the lords will say when they examine these documents. I wonder whether His Grace's claim to his title can survive such scrutiny. These are questions the peerage deserves to have answered. Beatrix felt Hadrian waver, saw the fractional hesitation in his posture, the moment when the weight of his father's sins threatened to crush him under the fear of being exposed as the son of a man who had lied, who had hidden truth, who had been weak enough to confess in writing. She moved before thought caught up to instinct. Beatrix stepped forward, not beside Hadrian, but slightly in front of him, making herself the focus, rather than allowing Ashfield to control the narrative. Baron Ashfield trades in theft and intimidation, she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. He bribes servants, forges seals, and threatens families to extort payment. And when his victims refuse to be bled dry, he performs this theater. She pulled from her reticule the copy of the confession letter that Radley had carefully made before the original could be destroyed, and held it up for all to see. Yes, she said, addressing not Ashfield, but the watching crowd. The late Duke of Blackmere sinned. He fathered a child outside wedlock and paid for silence. It is written here in his own hand, and I do not deny it. More gasps. Several ladies clutched their fans as if the scandal might be contagious. But Baron Ashfield is not a priest come to hear confession and offer absolution. Beatrix continued, her voice hardening. He is a blackmailer who thinks sin is a leash to drag sons to their knees for the crimes of fathers. He sells the dead to strip the living, and he has forged documents to do it. Ashfield's face flushed dark. You dare. Bring the trunk, Winifred's voice rang out from across the ballroom, cold and commanding. Hope appeared from a side door, hauling the same trunk they had discovered at Blackmere Hall. She dragged it to the space before the dais. With grim determination, her face set in lines that said she knew exactly how important this moment was. Beatrix dropped to her knees beside the trunk, propriety forgotten, modesty abandoned, and flung open the lid. Inside, displayed for all to see, a sealed die, engraved with a near-perfect copy of the Blackmere crest. Practice sheets, showing progressive attempts at forgery, each one closer to perfect than the last. Wax impressions in multiple colors. The stolen seal press that had been recovered from Sayé's possession. But no deed. The original deed remained in Ashfield's hands, and without it, the proof was incomplete. Ashfield's eyes gleamed with triumph beneath his fury. No deed, he said loudly, recovering his composure with desperate speed. The most important document is still in my possession, and without it, Your Grace, you have nothing but accusations and the tearful protests of a woman whose reputation is already. He never finished the sentence, because in that moment, with the ballroom holding its collective breath and scandal hanging in the air like smoke, Baron Frederick Ashfield made the mistake of panicked men throughout history. He ran. He shoved past Hadrian with sudden violence, surprising in a man who had seemed so controlled. The force sent Hadrian stumbling back a step. Ashfield bolted toward the terrace doors, portfolio clutched under his arm, his pleasant mask shattered into naked desperation. Ladies shrieked. A gentleman's wineglass shattered on the floor. A music stand toppled with a discordant crash of wood and metal sheet music, scattering across the polished parquet like white birds startled into flight. Hadrian recovered instantly. He lunged forward, vaulting over a fallen chair with the athletic grace of a man who had not spent his life only in drawing rooms. His hand caught the edge of a card table to pivot around it, boots finding purchase on floor slick with spilled champagne. Out of the way. His voice carried the unmistakable tone of command, and the crowd parted reflexively even as they craned their necks to watch. Beatrix did not remain on the dais, like a good lady waiting to be rescued. She gathered her scarlet skirts in both fists and ran, her heart pounding not with fear, but with fierce exhilaration. Her bare hand, she had pulled off the loose glove entirely now, caught the doorframe for balance as she plunged through after them into the October night. The terrace was wet from earlier rain, black stone gleaming in lamplight. Ashfield tore across it toward the side stairs that led down to the mews, where Beatrix realized with cold clarity he must have arranged a coach to wait a planned escape route in case his gambit went wrong. But Hadrian's stride was longer, his desperation sharper. He closed the distance like a hunting cat. His hand shot out and caught Ashfield's coat collar at the very edge of the stairs. Ashfield stumbled. The portfolio slipped from under his arm papers, scattering across wet stone. He twisted in Hadrian's grip, snarling like an animal, and his elbow drove back hard into Hadrian's ribs. The blow connected with an ugly thud. Hadrian's breath punched out, but his grip did not loosen. If anything, it tightened as he yanked Ashfield back from the stairs and slammed him against the iron railing. The impact drove the air from Ashfield's lungs in a graceless grunt. His legs sagged, and only Hadrian's grip on his collar kept him upright. "Where is the deed?" Hadrian demanded, voice low and lethal, each word bitten off sharp. Ashfield laughed, ragged, desperate, the sound of a man who has gambled everything and watched it crumble. "Gone," he spat, "burnt to ash, hidden where you will never find it. Without it, you will spend years in Chancery Court while your title bleeds away and your name rots. Let me go and I vanish quietly. Keep me and I drag you down screaming." For one terrible heartbeat, Beatrix saw Hadrian consider it. Saw him weigh silence against exposure containment, against the satisfaction of crushing the man who had threatened everything he held. She reached them breathing hard and stepped between Hadrian's rage and whatever decision was forming behind his eyes. "Do not bargain with men who sell shame," she said urgently, her voice cutting through the sound of their harsh breathing and the distant murmur of the crowd still inside. "He will not vanish. He will only wait until he can strike again from a safer distance with a higher price." Hadrian's gaze cut to her, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes, between the man he had been trained to be and the man his father's weakness had forced him to become. Beatrix turned to face Ashfield, and from her bodice she drew out the confession letter again, her father-in-law's sins in browned ink on expensive paper. She held it toward one of the terrace lanterns, bringing the paper close enough to the flame that the edges began to brown. Ashfield's eyes went wide, pupils dilating in genuine panic. "Stop. You mad if you burn that you destroy your only leverage. You want to leash him with his father's confession." Beatrix said, her voice cold and clear as winter water. "Then I cut the leash." The paper's edge curled as heat touched it. Smoke began to rise thin and bitter, the smell of old ink burning, of secrets turning to ash, of bridges being destroyed behind them with no way back. "No." Ashfield lunged against Hadrian's grip, desperation shattering the last of his composure. "The deed, it is in the music room inside the pianoforte. There is a false panel behind the strings, for God's sake. Woman, pull that paper back before you." Footsteps thundered onto the terrace. The magistrate Hadrian had quietly warned earlier in the evening kept within call at a nearby supper room, arriving with 2 constables the instant a breathless footman burst in with news of a disturbance. Radley at his elbow, eyes sharp expression, overwhelmed by the grandeur and scandal in equal measure. Behind them, 3 titled gentlemen who had followed the chase purely for the story they would dine out on for years. Cornered witnessed with the truth spilling from his own mouth, Baron Frederick Ashfield's face twisted through a dozen expressions: fury, calculation, defeat, before settling on something that might have been resignation or might have been the exhaustion of a man who had run out of moves. The magistrate stepped forward, his eyes hard despite the fine surroundings and the quality of the company. "Baron Ashfield, before these assembled witnesses, I ask you directly, did you forge the sealed I found in that trunk?" Ashfield looked at the flames, licking perilously close to Beatrix's bare fingers, at Hadrian's bleeding knuckles, still braced beside his head, at the gentlemen watching with open mouths and hungry eyes that would carry this tale to every corner of London by morning. His shoulders sagged. The defeat came sudden and complete, like a puppet with cut strings. "Yes." He hissed the word torn from him like a tooth being pulled. "Yes, I forged it. I paid Saya to steal papers. I paid Carter to let me into the house. I took what I needed because he jerked his chin toward Hadrian. "He has everything, while better men scrape for scraps. I took what should have been mine by right of nothing." Hadrian cut him off, voice flat as a headsman's blade. "You are a thief and a blackmailer. You have no rights here." The magistrate nodded once. The constable stepped forward with iron manacles that gleamed dully in the lamplight. They clicked shut around Ashfield's wrists with a sound like a coffin lid closing. "You will stand trial," the magistrate said. "Transportation, most likely. 7 years at minimum." Ashfield's eyes burned with hatred as he was dragged away. His fine coat torn at the shoulder, his hair disarrayed, all his careful grooming and pleasant masks stripped away to show the desperate predator beneath. You will regret this, he spat at Beatrix. You have burned your own shield, you foolish girl. Beatrix held up the singed letter signature, blackened at the very edge, but still legible, still usable if needed, but now rendered powerless by being dragged into light. I do not need shields made of shame, she said. I needed truth, and you gave it to me with your own mouth. Radley had already sprinted back inside toward the music room, boots echoing on marble. Within minutes that felt like hours to the crowd pressing close to the terrace doors to witness the aftermath, he returned carrying the original Blackmere deed, dust-smudged and creased from its hiding place, but gloriously unmistakably intact. He held it up before the magistrate and the gathered witnesses. The original, he announced, voice ringing with triumph, barely contained beneath professional precision. Found exactly where the Baron confessed it would be. His case collapses completely. The magistrate examined the deed with the careful attention of a man who understood he was handling history. He nodded slowly. This will be entered as evidence. The Baron's claims of legitimacy are void. Inside the ballroom, the mood shifted like wind changing direction. What had been shocked horror began transforming into something else. The particular hunger society felt when watching scandal resolve in a way that allowed them to pick a winning side without appearing to have chosen wrong earlier. Calling cards that had been withdrawn began to be quietly offered again. Matrons who had turned away now turned back, fans, fluttering eyes, calculating. The ton could forgive almost anything if the alternative was being on the wrong side of power when the dust settled, but not everything was easily mended. Lady Pomeroy stood near the far wall, her face pale as candle wax. When she saw Beatrix emerge from the terrace with singed paper in hand, and triumph written in her bearing, when she saw her daughter standing beside the Duke of Blackmere as an equal rather than a supplicant, something in her expression crumpled. She turned away before Beatrix could meet her eyes. Turned and walked toward the exit, as if she could not bear to witness her daughter's victory, because it made her own earlier abandonment impossible to excuse. Beatrix felt the cut sharp and clean as a surgical blade. But she did not call out, did not plead. She merely straightened her spine and felt the scarlet silk of her gown settle against her skin like armor that had been tested in fire and found sufficient. Hadrian leaned close, his voice pitched for her ears alone. You burned a duke's ghost tonight. I burned a baron's leash. Beatrix corrected and found she could breathe more easily than she had in weeks, as if some great weight had been lifted from her chest. His hand knuckles split and bleeding from where they had struck stone came up to touch the back of her wrist, where her pulse beat visible beneath skin. The contact was brief, warm anchoring. Stay. I am staying, she replied, meeting his eyes. Gray, meeting brown iron, meeting fire. Do not ask as if I might run now. His mouth curved in what might have been a smile, if he were the sort of man who smiled easily. Good. Marquis Delaney approached, then threading through the crowd, with the ease of a man who always managed to appear at the most opportune moments. His hands were spread in a gesture of mock innocence, but his eyes glittered with something that might have been respect or might have been recalculation of where his own interests lay. Upon my word, he drawled, his voice carrying just far enough. I came for a ball and found an execution. Most diverting, Lady Beatrix, most diverting indeed. Hadrian's gaze cut to him cold and final as a door slamming shut. Choose your next jest, Delaney, as if your reputation depends on it. Delaney's smile thinned slightly. Does it, Your Grace? Beatrix stepped forward before Hadrian could reply. Yes, she said clearly. Because you have used mine as entertainment for 15 years, my lord. You will not do so again. Choose whether you wish to be remembered as the man who tormented a child or the man who learned better. Delaney's eyes widened, fractionally genuine surprise flickering beneath his practiced charm. He bowed, and this time there was something almost like sincerity in the gesture. "Then perhaps I should learn better," he murmured. He retreated into the crowd. Within 6 months, word would reach London that he had married a wealthy Yorkshire heiress and removed himself to the north, where his wit was less known and therefore less dangerous. The ton would remember his clever tongue. But after tonight, they would also remember that Lady Beatrix Pomeroy, now universally understood to be the future Duchess of Blackmere, had made him back down. Winifred appeared at Beatrix's elbow with the silent grace of a woman who had spent decades moving through crowds. "Carter must be dealt with as well," she said quietly. "For completeness." Hadrian nodded once. Within minutes, the understeward was brought into the ballroom by 2 footmen, his face gray with terror, his hands shaking. The magistrate still present and now thoroughly invested in seeing justice done before so many witnesses listened as Radley read Carter's signed confession aloud. The crowd listened with rapt attention, not just to the words, but to the spectacle of a servant being brought low for betraying his master's trust. It satisfied something in them, some need to see order restored and betrayal punished. "You will be prosecuted for accepting bribes and providing access to a known criminal," the magistrate pronounced. "You will find no respectable situation after this, Mr. Carter. You have destroyed your own future for another man's coin." Carter crumpled weeping openly before the assembled company. No one offered comfort. No one looked away in embarrassment. They watched with the focused attention of people witnessing a morality tale being enacted in real time. Beatrix watched with an expression she kept carefully neutral, but inside she understood with cold clarity if she had failed tonight, she would have been Carter broken. Whispered about discarded without mercy. The ton was not kind. It was never kind. It simply chose its victims based on who had power and who did not. Tonight, she had power. Hadrian's hand closed around hers, one brief clasp in full view of the entire assembly, his bleeding knuckles against her bare skin, a public claim that was also a public acknowledgement. The whispers that rose in response were different now. No longer mockery. No longer cruel speculation about the ugly Duckling and the feared Duke. Now they whispered about power, about alliance, about a woman who had stood on a terrace and threatened to burn her own protection to force truth into light. The ballroom gradually began to resume its normal rhythms. The orchestra, which had fallen silent during the confrontation, began to play again. Couples moved onto the floor. Conversations sparked and spread like small fires. But nothing was the same as it had been when the evening began. The ton had witnessed something rare, a public battle fought with paper and truth instead of whispers and innuendo. They had seen a duke defend his name not by paying for silence, but by dragging secrets into light. And they had seen Lady Beatrix Pomeroy, mocked since childhood, dismissed as plain written off as unmarriageable, stand at the center of it all and refuse to break. That image would linger long after the scandal faded, would reshape how they saw her, would force them to recalculate what power looked like when it wore scarlet silk and carried singed paper like a battle standard. 3 weeks passed like the slow healing of a wound, necessary, uncomfortable, leaving scars that would not entirely fade, but that could be borne. Baron Ashfield was tried, convicted on multiple counts of theft, forgery, and blackmail. The trial was remarkably swift by legal standards, helped along by Hadrian's connections in the Lords and the fact that the evidence was overwhelming and had been witnessed by half of society's upper echelons. Transportation to Australia. 7 years of hard labor. His title remained. Titles could not be stripped by criminal courts, but his lands would be managed by trustees, his name would be mud, and his return would be to a country that had already forgotten him in favor of newer scandals. Mr. Saye and Mr. Carter were prosecuted as well. Lesser sentences, prison time, ruined reputations, futures destroyed. The law did not care that they had been desperate or foolish. The law cared that they had betrayed their positions of trust. Beatrix watched from the gallery as sentences were handed down and felt nothing but tired relief that it was over. Blackmere townhouse settled into something resembling normalcy, though the servants now moved with the wariness of people who had learned that even great houses could be infiltrated, that loyalty was not always as solid as it seemed. Hadrian spent long hours in his study with Radley, reviewing every document in the house, changing locks, interviewing staff, rebuilding the security that Ashfield had breached. His face grew leaner with exhaustion, his eyes shadowed from too little sleep. Beatrix helped where she could, reviewing accounts, organizing papers, writing correspondence to tenants, assuring them that the estate's management remained sound. She had moved beyond the pretense of being merely a visitor. She worked from a desk in the library as if she already belonged there. Because in all the ways that mattered, she did. One afternoon in late October, Hadrian entered the library to find her bent over a ledger, afternoon light, turning her brown hair to burnished copper. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her work, the precise way she formed numbers and the small furrow between her brows when something did not add up correctly, then the unconscious grace of her bare hands moving across paper. She looked up, sensing his presence. "Is something wrong?" "No." He crossed the room and set a folded document on the desk before her. Thick paper, expensive, sealed with red wax that bore his mark. "The settlement papers, final version." Beatrix broke the seal with her thumbnail and unfolded the pages. She read slowly, carefully, as she had learned to read anything that involved legal language and the shape of her future. The terms were generous. More than generous, they were protective in ways that went beyond mere legal obligation. Her dowry secured absolutely. Pin money that would give her independence. Provisions for any children that protected them regardless of gender. Language that ensured she could not be stripped of assets, even if the marriage ended badly. It was not romantic. But it was respect written in ink and witnessed by solicitors. It was, Beatrix realized with a tightness in her throat, a promise that he would not use marriage as a cage. She looked up slowly. "You wrote this as if you expect me to need protection from you." Hadrian's jaw worked once. He leaned against the desk close enough that she could have reached out and touched him if she dared. "My father made my mother powerless. She had no money of her own, no ability to leave when his scandals became unbearable, no legal standing to protect herself or her children. I watched her wither year by year, until there was nothing left but bitterness and fear." His voice was flat, but the pain beneath it ran deep as old scars. "I will not do that to you. Whatever happens between us, whether this arrangement turns to genuine affection or remains purely strategic, you will have means. You will have choices. You will never be trapped." Beatrix felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, which was ridiculous, because this was a legal document, not a declaration of love. But somehow the care embedded in these clauses meant more than poetry would have. "Thank you," she said, voice steadier than she felt. Hadrian's hand lifted, hovered near her face, then settled against her cheek with the same careful gentleness he had shown once before. "You can still walk away," he said quietly. "Ashfield is defeated. Your reputation has been complicated but not destroyed. You could return to society as the woman who helped bring down a blackmailer. There would be interest. Offers, possibly." Beatrix reached up and placed her hand over his, where it rested against her cheek. Her skin was warm from the fire, his cooler from being in the drafty corridor. "I told you once that I'm tired of walking away from rooms that should be mine." "This is not a room," Hadrian said. "This is a life, a title, expectations and burdens you cannot imagine until you are drowning in them. Then I will learn to swim." Beatrix turned her head slightly and pressed her lips to his palm, brief, deliberate, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with strategy. "I choose you, not your title, not your protection. You." Something in his face shifted control, cracking like ice over deep water. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and she felt the tremor in his hand and the want he was holding back through sheer force of will. "We should wait," he said, voice rough, "until after the wedding. Until it is proper and legal and—" "I have been proper my entire life," Beatrix interrupted softly. "It earned me nothing but mockery. I would rather be improper with you." Hadrian's control shattered. He pulled her up from her chair and kissed her, not gently this time, not carefully, but with the pent-up hunger of weeks spent wanting and not taking of propriety, stretched to breaking, and finally, blessedly snapping. Beatrix's hands fisted in his waistcoat, pulling him closer, wanting the solid reality of him against her after so many weeks of careful distance and strategic touches. His mouth was warm and demanding his hands, tangling in her hair and destroying whatever careful arrangement her maid had created that morning. She did not care. She kissed him back with equal hunger, rising on her toes to meet him better, gasping against his mouth when his hand slid down to the small of her back and pressed her close enough that she could feel every hard line of him through layers of fabric. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers and his hands shook slightly where they gripped her waist. "We are not waiting until the wedding," Beatrix said, voice uneven but certain. "No," Hadrian agreed raggedly. "Apparently we are not." They stood there in the library with afternoon light fading to evening, holding each other like survivors of a shipwreck, and let themselves be human and wanting and imperfect. Later, much later, they would rejoin the proper world, would make arrangements for a wedding that would be the event of the winter season, would navigate the complex dance of society's approval and lingering scandal. But for now, in the privacy of a library that smelled of old books and new promises, they allowed themselves to simply be. Spring came to London with pale sun and the particular optimism that follows surviving a hard winter. Blackmere townhouse's windows stood open to let in air that smelled of new leaves and coal smoke and the indefinable scent of a city waking from cold. In the Duchess's morning room, for it was hers now legally and completely, Beatrix stood before the mirror in a royal blue morning dress, fastening a ribbon with hands that had learned steadiness through trial. The scarlet gown hung in her wardrobe, still carefully preserved. She did not wear it often now, did not need to, but she kept it as a reminder of the girl who had learned to stop apologizing for existing, of the night when everything had changed, of the woman she had chosen to become. On the table beside her lay an invitation almanac. Again. The assembly rooms where her name had first cracked under public laughter, where Hadrian had kissed her gloved hand and started a scandal that had reshaped both their lives. Lady Winifred had accepted on their behalf without asking. "You must be seen there," she had said firmly. "You must show them that you are not hiding, not ashamed, not diminished." A baby's cry cut through the morning quiet, imperious, demanding, utterly unconcerned with titles or social standing or anything beyond immediate needs. The sound came from the nursery next door, carried through walls that had been designed for discretion, but could not entirely muffle new life's insistent voice. Hadrian entered the morning room, his coat half-buttoned, cravat, still untied hair slightly damp from washing. He stopped when he saw the invitation, and something in his posture shifted tension coiling in shoulders that had learned to carry too much weight too young. "Do you wish to go?" he asked. Beatrix picked up her gloves from the table-long kid leather, perfectly fitted, and then deliberately set them down again. Her hands remained bearskin, pale in the morning light, and she felt no need to hide them. "Let them see my bare hands," she said. "Let them remember what hands can do: open trunks, sign settlements, burn leashes, write truths that some would prefer stay hidden." A sound escaped Hadrian, startled. Ruff caught somewhere between a laugh and something raw. He crossed the room and offered his arm, and this time there was no hesitation in the gesture, no calculation of what it might cost. "Then we go together," he said, "and we give them nothing they can use to own us." Hope appeared with the infant bundled in fine linen, the baby's face red with righteous indignation at being made to wait. Hope's eyes met Beatrix's, and something passed between them. Recognition, triumph, the shared knowledge of women who had survived rooms that had tried to break them. From the corridor outside, Winifred's voice drifted sharp and amused. "Do not let them bait you. And if they do, make it memorable." Radley appeared with his ever-present papers, looking more relaxed than he had in months. "The final accounting is complete, Your Grace. The estate is fully secure. No more missing documents, no more mysterious visitors." Lady Eloise emerged from her own room, dressed for morning calls, her posture straightened by the knowledge that her brother's victory had secured her future as well. She met Beatrix's gaze and smiled, tentative, grateful, real. "Are we going to Almack's, then?" she asked. "We are," Beatrix confirmed. They moved as a group toward the entrance hall where the carriage waited. As they descended the stairs, a footman brought the Morning Post, and on top of the stack, a fresh scandal sheet. Beatrix took it, unfolded it, and felt her mouth curve. The Duchess in scarlet ink. A lady's triumph over a baron's plot. The article beneath praised her courage, her intelligence, her refusal to be cowed. It called her a heroine of the season, a woman who had proven that virtue lay not in silent endurance, but in bold truth-telling. The Tun, having witnessed her win, had rewritten its narrative. Now she was not the ugly duckling they had mocked. She was the brave woman who had helped expose corruption at the highest levels. Hypocrisy, Beatrix thought, but useful hypocrisy. She folded the sheet once and set it aside. Hadrian's hand found hers, bare palm to bare palm, warm and solid and real. "Ready?" he asked. "I have been ready since I removed my glove at Almack's 2 years ago." Beatrix replied, "Let us show them what we have become." The carriage rolled through Mayfair's morning streets. Inside, Beatrix sat with her husband's hand in hers, her child sleeping in a basket at her feet, her future uncertain, but entirely her own. She had been called Duckling for 15 years. But she had learned slowly, painfully, triumphantly, that transformation was not about becoming beautiful in the way society defined beauty. It was about becoming powerful in ways society had tried to deny her. And as the carriage turned toward Almack's, Beatrix smiled. Let them watch. Let them whisper. She had learned how to make whispers sound like wind against stone, loud, persistent, impossible to ignore, but ultimately unable to break what had been built on truth and will and refusal to be silent.